Salutations, starlings. I'm Sweetling, and this is good morning. It is Tuesday, February 17th. Last week, on February 11th, I officially finished my first book of the year. I know, it took me forever. It's probably one of the more slower starts to my reading goal. But I have finished the book. And surprise, surprise, it was actually Animal Farm. And I wasn't originally going to make a video about it. But then I had a friend ask me what I thought of it. And I gave them like a brief little explanation because they knew about it, they've never read it. And basically it got my brain thinking. Plus I wrote a bunch of notes in the margins. So, I was like, we'll actually sit down and talk about it. Why not? So if you're not familiar, Animal Farm is by George Orwell. It is considered a classic. It's like a penguin classic. Penguin classic, Signet classic. I have the Signet classic version. The 75th anniversary for it was a few years ago, I want to say. Let me double check that. About 6 years ago was the 75th anniversary. It is now 81 years old. However, people say that it's still a good one to read because it is still relevant. And unfortunately, after reading it, it is. The gist of it is there is, on major farms, there is all the animals get together on the eve of the death of the oldest animal there, being a boar. And he's basically like, you guys should rebel. I have had dreams about it. I've had visions. There's even a song. I'll sing you the song. But you should rebel because we shouldn't be basically treated the way that we are treated as animals. All the work we're doing is producing for the humans, but not really for us. Like everything that we're producing, we're not really seeing it. It's all being taken and either consumed by the humans who run the farm or sold to other humans to consume. And then we get worked all day and night, and we don't get to retire. We don't get to, enjoy life. There are specific nods as I read it that I could tell the distinct groups of people that the animals kind of embodied. Let's see. Like Clover. Clover is one of the horses in the story, and she's had 4 children, and each of them were sold at a year old, and it reminded me of basically similar to Black women who were enslavement, how they would have children and then their children would then be sold off as, you know, as labor. And then there's also the other horse, Boxer, who, when the animals rebel and take over, he's always been a hard worker, continues to be a hard worker, and it just reminds me of the way that, you know, specifically Black men had to work and work and work and work, but like, you know, it could represent other groups of either men or even women who, you know, just like work their entire lives and give effort way over what they need to be giving to their source of income and receive nothing back from it but aches and pains and being treated poorly, thinking that, you know, if I just work harder, things will get easier, when half the time that typically doesn't end up being the case when working for someone else. And then there's Benjamin. Benjamin is the, right, that's his name. Benjamin is the donkey. He doesn't say much at all, but knows a lot. And it's reminiscent of just like the people who understand what is going on and either feel like, well, you're either going to figure it out or you're not, or they just don't get heard when they speak. So then the one time that they do, and then they get basically told off, such as like later on in the book, the one time that Benjamin decides that he's going to assist, and be like, hey, this is actually wrong, this is what's actually happening, which happens after Boxer dies. Spoiler, surprise. Book's 81 years old. I'm sure you knew something about it. Um, Boxer basically works himself to death, and Benjamin is like, hey, they're not taking him to the hospital. He's on the eve of dying, and instead of actually taking him to the hospital, they're taking him to, you know, use his meat and bones, and he's not coming back. He's not going to recover. They're lying to us. That's not actually a hospital. And who was in charge was like, no, it is a hospital. They just didn't replace the signs on the van, and it's actually owned by an animal hospital, and they took as much good care of him as they could, but unfortunately, he still passed away. And then there's also Molly, and Molly is uh, ironically, unironically, a white horse. And she is not very much for the rebellion because she enjoys her ribbons and she enjoys sugar. And when the animals decide that they are going to rebel, they're like, we don't stay in the house. We don't eat we don't eat food that we don't need to consume. So like the sugar. And we don't wear human clothes, and we don't, don't talk to the humans. We're not assisting them in any way. We're all about us now. And Molly just can't get behind it. Molly cannot get with the program. She likes her ribbons. She likes her sugar. She likes to go be brushed and cared for, and goes goes all the way out to the edge of the property to go hang out with a stable hand of the other farm. And Molly's character to me is very reminiscent of today's white feminism, um, in the sense where, oh, it's coming in my eye. Very much in the sense where it's like, yes, I believe and I support what we are doing collectively and then actively working against it, in the sense that typically what is seen in white feminism as in, like, they support LGBTQ people and black and brown people, but then they are married to men who are actively working against it. Or the issue that we're having right now with literacy, and just like understanding the messages that books are giving, and saying that books aren't political when books can be and very much are political, such as this one. What we're having right now is the whole Wuthering Heights issue with the movie adaptation by Emerald Fennell, and how she casted Jacob Elordi as the Heathcliff character, when he is distinctly written in the book as a man of I won't say black, but like brown descent. They use in the book, they use like what one of the no words, gypsy, and words basically alluding to the fact that he has darker skin and he is not white, and that is the source of his poor treatment in the novel. And erasing that basically changes inherently a lot of the the story, and basically, like, like, you don't really quite understand why he's being treated the way that he is now being treated. But it's a whole thing. There are a bunch of creators who talk about it. D'Angelo talks about it. I watched another video. I can't remember her name at the moment. I'll probably, it was a YouTube reel, so I'll probably link it if I can remember and if I can find it again. But if you want, there's multiple people already talking about the whole situation. But it's just an example of the case of what's happening, where they're choosing to ignore the facts of the characterization of Heathcliff and how his race is important to the novel and to the story. And the book is not meant to be a love story or sexy erotica at all. Moving on. The pigs, specifically Napoleon and like Squealer, are characterized as the I'm not sure what word I want to use, but it is very much reminiscent of like they're performing a dictatorship, the pigs in general. Once the animals all rebel and they come across they make up all their rules of, like, let's read them. Let's read them. I can find them. Okay. They come up with these 7 commandments. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill another animal. And you know, at this point, it's not one of my videos if we don't hear a truck driving down the road. And all animals are equal. And that's like their 7 commandments. And as the book progresses, we see the pigs go back on every single one of them. George Orwell originally wrote this to talk about Russia, Stalinist Russia. But obviously, as I read it, I was like, I could relate this to what's going on right now. I could relate this to what's going on in, I'm going to say, even reminiscent of, like basically how we got today's America. Not America, sorry, US, United States. They're really bumping it over there. I wonder if you can hear it in the background. Like how we had the Boston Tea Party, rebelling against the British, then becoming our own U.S., becoming its own nation, and then having the Constitution, and how it was like literally first line, all men are created equal, but women can't vote. Black people were enslaved, so black men were not treated equally, and just like really it's reminiscent of so many different parts of history. I am not well versed in history, but I know a few things. I know a few things. But there was, we had the in the book we have what seems to be like a nod to the 2-party system with Snowball and Napoleon, which are both pigs, and the pigs were seemingly smarter than the rest of the animals and learned to read and to write, and only some of the animals could pick up reading. Hardly any of them could pick up writing. So obviously you can see how later on that's going to influence what's going on. And so Snowball and Napoleon had a lot of disagreements. They didn't agree on a lot of things, and there was a lot of meetings. And Snowball had the idea of making a windmill, and Napoleon was opposed to it, thinking that we didn't need it. There was a whole thing of Napoleon, creating a school, and he took puppies that were born and like took them into his school, and then the puppies were never seen. Well, they weren't never seen, but they weren't seen again for a while. And it's like, that was also something that's like, but the pigs are basically treating themselves better than they're treating the other animals. And then it just gets worse when Napoleon gets tired of battling back and forth with Snowball. So he decides to basically get rid of Snowball during the voting of the windmill. But those the puppies make a reappearance, and they're now these vicious dogs that only listen to Napoleon's command, and they run Snowball out of the farm. And he's like, Snowball was a traitor. Snowball did this and that. He was actually working with Mr. What was his name? Basically, the previous owner of the farm, because I can't be bothered to remember his name. He was important for the sake that his farm gets overthrown. That's about it, and that he was drunk, and that's why they had the rule of no animals shall drink. But Napoleon gets rid of his opposition. He uses it to take over, says that, like our Sunday morning meetings, yeah, no more. We're not doing that anymore because, Snowball was working with our enemies the whole time. And then basically people who started to disapprove got growled at, and, everyone was terrified of these dogs, that they're going to be viciously torn apart. Sorry, didn't mean to yawn. So then now we're silencing the other animals. The sheep are the devout followers of the pigs, and that they're bleeding, and they ramble the same thing over and over and over again, following like sheep. And basically Napoleon just frightens everyone into agreeing with him, and making them think that he has their best interests at heart, when really he only has the interest of himself, and through him the pigs, because then they move into the house and they start sleeping in the beds, they start killing other animals who are going against them. So basically anyone who even, they have confessional. I think the first night that Napoleon takes over, Mr. Jones, that's his name. Yeah, I'm saying how loyalty and obedience is the most important. And the animals start getting, worked to death, and they no longer have any rest days, and they're working longer than the pigs are working. And the excuse is that, oh, well, we're planning so much for us, and you guys can't read and you guys can't write, so somebody has to do it. So of course we'll do it, but we work different hours than you work, and so they're working less. They start drinking, start wearing clothes, they start associating with an outsider to start reselling their materials to the public, to build their windmill, and partnering with other farms who don't have their best interest at heart, and just basically becoming a worse version than what they already had to begin with. And it makes you think about, like, well, do we want the old regime back? Do we want to stay in the new regime? Are we going to rebel? Are we not going to rebel? How long are we going to listen to what's going on? And it's just, at the end of the day, it's not really I mean, you could like it or not like it, but it's obviously a cautionary tale and more of a book that's like beware of the signs and don't let yourself like fall into these traps, and like this is what's happening behind closed doors, and this is what people will say, but this is then what they'll do. um, and I had a point that I was going to make, but I cannot remember what it is at the moment. But yeah, then Snowball becomes a scope gate for everything, and it's like he after he leaves, he kind of haunts the narrative, because they see him as like this outside. He himself never reappears in the book, but like he's this outsider, who gets blamed for everything wrong that happens when they build the windmill too small and it blows away, like they too thin and it blows away, and then they complete it, um, and then they make a deal with one of the other farms, and then their windmill gets blown up, and then they have to remake it again because of Napoleon's poor choice of aligning himself with somebody who doesn't have the animal's best interest at heart. And then later, how at the end of the book, they're really starting to see just how terrible, Napoleon is. Um, oh, yeah, and like Molly leaves, and like chapter what? She leaves way before, the Snowball and Napoleon fiasco. She skips out to go live her life of ribbons and sugar cubes, never to be seen again. And it's just the longer and longer that they're under Napoleon's, watchful eye, the less they had of their previous rebellious spirit of, like we're going to do everything for ourselves, and we're going to, you know, give ourselves retirement after we've done so much work, and we're all going to contribute and we're all going to share. And it just, you see how quickly the agendas of other people who only have their best interest, goes and screws you over, which is what's happening to all these other animals. Like I said, Benjamin only speaks up the one time, and then he's done, and then he doesn't speak up again. Napoleon goes and kills other animals, changes the rules because Clover's always remembering and being like, hey, I thought that was something we're not supposed to do. I thought, hey, we're not supposed to sleep in beds. And then it turns out that they've been changing the rules on them. So when she goes and checks, it's like, oh, animals shall not sleep in beds with sheets. Animals shall not drink alcohol in excess, when it was animals shall not drink alcohol. It's just they're little by little changing the rules, and what they deemed as in like these are things we are not going to do, and how they go back upon them, saying one thing, doing completely the opposite. Um, I put at the end, and one of my notes is about how we see Napoleon and all the other pigs doing all the things that they said they weren't going to do and starting to act more human like, starting to walk on two legs and wear clothes and sleeping in beds with sheets, drinking alcohol. I had specifically said that Napoleon reminds me of white gay men who are um, parading around like they're, better, um, and on the same level as like straight cis men, in the way that, like white gay men are higher up on the hierarchy of, like what's acceptable and whatnot, but are they're benefiting from the system and the fact that they are um, cis white men, but the fact that they are gay is what usually um, is the disalignment in a lot of, conservative Republican spaces, but then they're still voting conservative Republically and supporting what those people are in support of, and it's kind of to their own detriment, in the sense that, like Napoleon got um, taken advantage of and made a deal, and then the deal ended up being a false deal, and they got nothing out of it but their windmill destroyed, and um, still ended up aligning himself with them, um, and improving the way that those men now run their farms, because they see how much profit Napoleon has made from the animal farm, um, and taking advantage of his own people and using them as like basically slave labor, and then benefiting off of it. And it's seen as like, wow, you did such a great thing to these other human farmers. Um, and he's now like in on their plans, and they're having dinner and drinking and gambling, and it goes back to being the manor farm. Um, and like the ending line of the book is the creatures outside, basically the other animals who were looking in on the house because they knew that the other farmers were there. The creatures outside looking from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. Um, and like that's it. It's basically just this like very sad and so, like informative literary dystopian, talking about what's going on um, in places of power. And how you have to be careful of what you're willing to accept and what you're going to let slide, because you let so much slide that in the end you end up in one of these systems that where you're being taken advantage of, and you're the labor, you're the product. um, so yes, still very much relevant today, um, even though it was written about a completely different time in, like I said, about the Stalinist Russia in 1945, and it is now 2026, and I can see, things from history that match with what was talked about, but also things that are happening now that are matching exactly or similar to what was discussed in this fiction novel. Um, so if I were to give it a rating, I'd probably give it like, 4 stars. I mean, like, yeah, I enjoyed it. It was intriguing. I read it all the way through. I could, understand what was being said at um, each part. Like I said, I could find points in history and present time that relate to what is happening now. And I can understand why it was, a high school book requirement to read. I didn't have to read it for high school, but for some people it was a high school book requirement, and how it should still be a book that people should read today because of the fact that it is still relevant and you can allude it to so many different points in time, including the um, current presidency going on right now. Honestly, this is lighter than all of the horrific things I keep hearing about the files. So yes, if you haven't read it, read it. See what it makes you think of. Even if I just gave you practically half the book, it's still nice to see the words verbatim of how George Orwell wrote it. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I'd probably give it like a 4 stars just because it's well written. I felt saddened and like upset and disappointed by the end, but I felt like I was like, for the sake of what the novel is trying to do, how it ends is very fitting. And yeah. So this is my little review on Animal Farm, how I thought, how I felt. First book of the year. Took me forever to read it, which is hilarious because it's only 152 pages. I've read books that are like 320 pages faster than I've read this, but I was truly making notes and making notes and trying to absorb it for what it was in a like literary sense, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's all I have for today. And yeah, and I was gonna say something about Porco Rosso because it kind of at the end, reading it reminded me a little bit of Porco Rosso, and just if you haven't seen it, it's a great Studio Ghibli film. I feel like it's a little underrated actually, because everyone's always like Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro, but Porco Rosso, oh. And when you learn how he got to be, just watch it. If you want something it's not even going to be as close on the level of what's being discussed. But if you want a human like pig story. Porco Rosso. That was way out of left field. Anyway, um, thanks for watching. Until next time, starlings. Bye.